that it's really funny that people are persisting in this notion that science basically can and then should be brought to all aspects of life. That science is going to be the recipe for all that ails humanity. I think this is so ridiculous. I can't believe that people can't see how absurd that is. Try to think of all the things for which there will never be a scientific methodology or even a scientific answer. Why are people here? Why did the cosmos come into being? Will belief somehow be able to be reduced to prediction? Is it the case that there is what people right now experience as they're living their life? Are they experiencing belief but just fooling themselves into something that simply could be predicted or not predicted with more and less accuracy, and that ultimately we will one day have a science that gives us no reason for beliefs? I mean, are beliefs basically outdated relics from the ultimate information processing system, which would have true facts of everything, and from there it would just, I guess, not need a belief? People should see that for the absurdity that it is. Could you have a joke? Could you have a play in fancy? Could you have a piece of art? Right? When I just posted on my favorites Allen Ginsberg's poem America and him reading it. It's funny to think, there's going to be a science of this. Do you really want a science of poetry? Do you really want the person who you're in love with to be using a model of scientific prediction in their interactions with you? No. Could that be useful at some level in some ways? Oh, certainly. Sure. Let's do all kinds of normative data. Let's do comparative data. I think it's very important to get normative data for various reasons. But your relationship, both to yourself and to the world and to other people, those relationships are absolutely unique. They are once occurrent. There was nothing in, what was it that made this particular person, Ginsberg, do that poem? Why did Alan Watts bring the particular kinds of fruits that he did? Will you really make a science of people? That seems to me to be misunderstanding the difference between cultivating and observing what's happening. As soon as you want to intervene in what we call action, that is intentionally chosen behavior that's more than just continuous movement. Now see, if I walk along a path and then I see a split in the road and I decide to go left, and then I just let that path go by, and then I go a little bit more and I come again to a path, a fork in the path, and I decide to go right, to the outside observer, there was just a continuous string of action. There really was no decision. But to the person who encounters that fork, they may actually have encountered the reality of the path not taken. That's one thing that the outside observer never really gets at. I think it's funny, and I'm sorry to have to invoke this person's name, and please, this is encouraging you to shoot a video. I'd like to hear you give, you suggest much about science. So Darwin's Garden, I'd like to hear your very articulate and exact video on what science is and how it really can be applied to everything. I'm sure people would like to hear that in greater detail. But I think that the choice, and I think you did choose it, the choice of the name Darwin's Garden is interesting. I think people should find that as an interesting choice of a title for a profile, right? I'm stuck with Professor Anton. I guess I could get a new profile. I'm a professor, though. I guess that's true. Okay, but Darwin's Garden is a very interesting choice because it's obviously, this is a person who doesn't believe in choice. Supposedly, this channel, and he just grew right out of nature. He's a piece of the garden, and that's a beautiful thought, but isn't one of the varieties of nature that strange fruit that makes possible choice? Aren't we that very complex and very interesting part of nature that made possible a kind of releasement into decision making that is different than the kinds of predictive orientations that one has with a scientific orientation? That is, science could be very good for predicting things, but it's not very good for helping you appreciate the kind of knowledge that can be gained from a poem. Now, I've heard a couple people in responding to "Don't Be Dogmatic About Science" video, and I think it's very funny how much people want to suggest that there's this true knowledge, and then there's not, there's knowledge stuff, and this is what you want science for, and then there's everything else, as if there isn't a kind of knowing or a kind of knowledge in poetry, in art, in film, in theater, in fiction. In fact, fiction often can convey certain kinds of truths. Oftentimes, fiction allows for a conveying of contradictory truths. Yeah, look before you leap, and he who hesitates is lost. Now, those aren't contradictory. They look like they're contradictory to a third person who's just trying to integrate a system that's internally consistent. But to an observer who's using them to try to meet and greet a particular situation, there's much knowledge to be had in either of those, but neither of those are ultimately true. You're not questioning the veracity of the statement. You're trying to assess how well you, as a user, can use the truth or the knowledge available in the application of that piece of wisdom. Too many people don't, perhaps, know the difference, and they should know, that is, have knowledge about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Are they simply the same thing? I don't think that they are. Now, are you going to have a scientific method for determining the difference between wisdom and knowledge? Now, that will be very interesting. I think that's sort of a fun question. Could there be kinds of knowledge that aren't scientific, and could there be kinds of wisdom that aren't knowledge? No, I think we want to say that wisdom is a kind of knowledge, but I don't think that all wisdom is subject to scientific methodology. So, what are we going to do with that? So those are some questions that I would encourage those people who want to advocate that science needs to be brought to everything, that we all need to be, I guess, and let me just wrap up with this. I'm not suggesting that science hasn't been radically underappreciated, that it doesn't need to be more well understood, and that I think more people need to get rid of some outdated fantasies, that there are many belief systems that have an expired shelf life, and that people do need to accept lots of biological I guess knowledge that's been accumulated there about evolution. I think there's lots and lots of knowledge in physics and in chemistry, certainly pharmacology, that has been very, very powerful in affecting our lives. But all of those things are important, but they shouldn't hide the real diversity of the world, including the human diversity of art and music and love and relations, and all of those ways that you're absolutely unique, which means that your life is more like an art than a science. The people who want to reduce life to a science are missing how much of life is basically a practice, and it's a practice that is an art. Okay, thanks.